Welcome to another episode of Legal for Tech, the podcast. So, guys, you do recognize my voice here. It's always Rosie. And as I've said many times, this is just a group of students and young professionals who are very interested in knowing about technology and, yes, its regulation. And today I'm joined by my colleague and friend, Giacomo. Hi, Giacomo. Great to see you.
Hi, Rosie. Great to see you as well.
Lovely to have you here because finally our guest meets you again. Not really again. You were the only one left because we are talking to someone that's met us not once, actually twice, once in person in Trento, in my former university. And that person is Professor Mark Leiser. Hello, Mark. Great to see you again.
Hi, Rosie. Good to be back. Thanks for having me.
I'm so happy to see you, especially because I've been waiting for your book for so incredibly long. It's actually a joke. Like I actually had to go to my neighbor to ask for it. It was super funny. Thanks, Amazon, and also other deliveries are available.
Thanks for the promotion. Yeah.
No problem. It's
I'll
gonna
give you
go.
€5 when I see you next. Okay.
We're gonna go for that promotion of your great book. That's called Dark Patterns, Deceptive Designs, and the Law. So I guess that's what you've been doing for the past, well, one year, more or less, maybe a bit more.
But who's counting?
Not us. But do give us an update. What are you working on, and how has your life been since we've last seen you in April?
Well, yeah, it's been a really exciting time. Maybe not the best time to be a user in the modern world, but there has been a lot of sort of attention being paid to dark patterns now that maybe wasn't taking place when I first started working on the context. Obviously, lots of tricks and decoys and malicious design tactics were being deployed, over several years to take advantage of the fact that users don't make the best decisions when they go online, and platforms were struggling to capture user engagement, attention, maximize profits, and also comply with the law. So it became kind of a shorthand tactic, really, or practice to kind of use these tricks to get people to give privacy, permission, and data protection consent and agree to the terms and conditions. But from my perspective, there's been so much attention paid to it from a regulatory point of view that we have them now in the DSA, and there's a prohibition in the Digital Markets Act and the Data Act, and there's some guidance for social media platforms for data protection, and the behavioral guidance and study guide from the European Commission on the UCPD talks about dark patterns. So yeah, it got the regulatory attention it needed. I'm not sure that the websites have fully complied yet, but we're getting there. We're making some progress.
And you're here, and also we are here to celebrate a very special occasion, that is the release of your book, Dark Patterns, Deceptive Designs and the Law. What are your first impressions since publishing it? And would you say you're satisfied with the result of this book?
Oh, there's two questions there. I don't know. I think there's always, this is my first book that I've written, so I think there's always something that you wish you had included, or time to redo, or maybe rethink, or somebody comes out with a really amazing article that makes you question something that you've written. I think because of, Harry Brignall wrote the foreword to the book, who he coined the term dark patterns, working with some amazing people, from regulators to designers like Harry, or ethicists like Harry, has been really rewarding. I do think that I'm happy with the outcome. I think some of the people that have already been able to get through some of the chapters have given me some very nice and warm praise. I do wish that I had maybe spent some more time on some more specifics, like gaming. Dark patterns in games has become very forthright to me, and I wish I had had some more time or some more pages to dedicate to that topic in particular. But yeah, overall, I'm relatively happy with it.
I'm really, really interested in knowing this idea that you had about gaming, and maybe we will have some time to talk about it in the future
Sure.
because um, I've seen potentially, and I can't really discuss about this, but like I've seen some case law coming up, both in the topic of the DSA and of course protection of minors, but something has been coming up also on the topic of gaming and dark patterns and how basically incredibly to me, because I'm not a gamer, but apparently a lot of children are using much more the gaming platforms as like social media platforms, and perhaps we've been focusing a bit too much on social media platforms if we look at child protection in the future. So I would like to ask you to kind of put these two topics, impossibly so, together and give us an understanding of, from your perspective, whether, for example, private enforcement can um, fill in the gaps about dark patterns.
Yeah, so it's really interesting though, because when you're absolutely right, we're spending an awful lot of time talking about Snapchat and Facebook and Instagram, but it feels like there's a lot of grown-ups in the room talking about law and regulation and child safety, and the kids have already figured out like we don't use Facebook anymore. Like Instagram is very sterile and controlled environment, but most of the engagement is actually done via gaming platforms. And it's not clear cut that Article 25 of the DSA even applies to gaming platforms, or if they're an online platform within the meaning of the DSA. So there might be a pretty big gap about whether dark patterns applies to, or the rules regulating or prohibiting dark patterns applied to gaming platforms anyway. So, and then there's all these things that are unique to gaming platforms. Like, I guess I made this comment the other day. Like when I was growing up, maybe you played tic-tac-toe to pass some time, or shoots and ladders, and then if you got into video games, it was pretty sterile in the sense of that you played Mario Brothers or Pac-Man or yeah,
Hey, I'm in love with that guy, so
yeah.
please, like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
keep it.
But like and then I used to play football, FIFA, EA Sports and FIFA and whatnot. And you go on,
Formerly known as FIFA, yeah.
yeah. But the best part about it was they worked because you could play the computer, right? So you didn't need to have somebody else there in order to use the video game. And nowadays, it's like to play the computers next to impossible. It's almost like you have to join a community and you have to go up against people that are online, and the whole environment has changed. So it can be cost. Not only do you get the game, but you have to buy things to advance, and you have to participate with strangers in order to be part of a community and advance. And then there's, you know, unfortunately, some games are using gambling mechanics to get people to, engage them and keep coming back and spending things to advance, or the phrase that's often thrown is grinding the game down. So you make it really slow so that you can't advance unless you pay for the service or pay for equipment or armor or whatever game it is to advance through. And you're right, a lot of the kids are doing that, and they've got their headphones on and they're talking to either friends or strangers, which comes with its own sort of benefits and dangers as well. Yeah, but let's not talk about child safety in that context. Let's talk about what's happening on Facebook and
I
ban
mean,
social media. Yeah.
I
Mm,
think you said something very, very important there because, for example, the Commission guidelines, the one that got released, I think in July
yeah.
2025, if I'm not mistaken, they really do kind of mention gaming, I think once in the whole
Mhm.
guidelines,
Yeah.
and you're there thinking, I've seen loads of kids on those video games actually. So
It's
I think you,
Yeah, it's like regulating roller rinks. It's like nobody roller skates anymore. Like just a handful of people go to the roller rink and skate around. But like, okay, well, let's regulate something else that kids don't do anymore. And I feel like this is the thing that we're stuck in is, are we actually regulating the right people or the right actors? And maybe that's a conversation for another day. But gaming does seem to have It's probably by design where the game is designed for adults, but they're popular with kids. And then you could even say that some of them are marketing or advertising towards kids to get them to play. And but that's okay because it's not social media, so we're not going to pay any attention there.
It's not going to be the violence in video games that's going to change our future, but potentially
Yeah.
the dark patterns in them.
Yeah.
But maybe my mom was right. And anyways, let's say so.
But there's a lot of the games that, I mean, again, there has been some regulatory action against the gaming industry for the use of dark patterns. Fortnite and Epic have both been sanctioned by the FTC, I think. We're still trying to figure out how to fix some of the other problems that the platforms have created for themselves, I think.
Speaking again about the book, we know that you cover a lot different jurisdictions. Could you maybe give us a quick overview on the most relevant provision to tackling AI-driven manipulation in the online space? Like also a personal view, like what's your favorite provision among this and which one instead you would get rid of it?
Well, I was contacted, I made mention of this in the book. I was contacted by the European Commission to do a background report into what Article 5.1a and 5.1b of the AI Act does. I submitted this to them, and then a very abbreviated version of my report, or elements of my report, appeared in the guidelines for the prohibitions under Article 5.1a and b. And what is clear from that provision and even that experience is that the thresholds for what amounts to a prohibition is extremely high. There's a lot of things that you have to prove. And it didn't have to be as high as it is, but that's what the lawmakers agreed and passed. But to try and figure out whether somebody's decision is um, it has been caused by a subliminal technique, for example. It must be a material distortion. It also has to cause significant harm. That creates a quite a high threshold. And what I did in my background report was kind of look for other examples or other areas of law in the EU where the phrase significant harm is used or material distortion is used. To 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 sort of look for tests that exists. And when you put all of these things together, it's quite a high threshold. So it doesn't offer as much, it's a prohibition, but it's a prohibition that on the worst of the worst, rather than maybe having some other lower threshold in order to get. So Article 5.1a and 5.1b does give us some layers of protection. But I also think that those provisions in particular, in order to hit the prohibition, you've really got to be doing a lot of stuff. So let me give you an example. 5.1a has a prohibition on subliminal techniques. And yeah, okay, I get that. That's great. What are subliminal techniques? Things that you can't see, things that you can't hear. But you could also argue that like a little noise being played in your ear to keep you awake or keep you working longer, that's not a subliminal technique. So it wouldn't fall under the prohibition because people can hear it. I mean, so the defense would be that, yeah, it makes a material distortion. Yes, it might cause significant harm. Our workers are staying awake longer and working longer hours, but it's not a subliminal technique, so it wouldn't fall foul of the prohibition. So that doesn't make me feel necessarily the best about what the law is doing and what it isn't doing at any given time. You also have this problem under 5.1b, where you say vulnerability. And vulnerability, I think it's age, disability, and socioeconomic status. And I've made the point that gender and sex isn't covered there. So if, for example, my AI is discriminating against women, and it's people in an HR context are not being called for interviews, somebody could make a claim under 5.1b, but the recruiting agency or the HR company says, well, the prohibition under 5.1b only applies to age, disability, and socioeconomic status and not gender. And that doesn't make me feel great about what the prohibition does and doesn't do either. So socioeconomic status is quite, it's limited. It's necessarily narrow, or it's unnecessarily narrow. And I also think that due to changes in the political climate and the way we are maybe moving towards anti-regulation in the way we think about technology as many different factors, that the political reality of 5.1b was they wanted it to be business friendly. And I don't necessarily think that that's a great thing for the effective protection of fundamental rights.
I really like this kind of idea about women that you said, because I think today I'm just going to say I really like everything you say. But also, no, because I was actually looking into the discrimination law, into kind of like more European labor law, and I was shocked to find out that there are actually two different provisions. One is for discrimination in general, so like age, sexual orientation, disabilities and stuff. And then there's one like separate for women, which I think on the one hand makes sense, because then you have like equal treatment, and that's specifically like the gender to address the gender pay gap.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I feel like sometimes you kind of lose track on, for example, a discrimination that could happen because you are a woman and disabled, which is something that AI does particularly well, I'm told, as in general manufacturing and other structures in our society, I have to say.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, I've pointed this out because I was at Bilata a few years ago, this big law tech conference in Britain and Ireland, and there's been a lot of UK researchers that I was privileged to hear explain their research into femtech, and they were talking about the sort of period tracking apps that women download to help them with their cycles and their fertility, etc. And obviously as a male, I've never never used one of those. My partner has used them for fertility purposes when we were planning to have a baby, but I've never really been engaged in that. But I was also curious as to whether somebody being on their period would be a vulnerability that an AI could use for the purposes of targeting.
I mean, a judge, I'm pretty sure a judge in the US has kind of decided into that direction, like that I think Flow was the app that was taking into, like it was saying exactly that you are exploiting a vulnerability because the person in that moment is vulnerable.
But Article 5.1b limits vulnerability to age, disability, and socioeconomic status. So
period is no disability.
This is problematic, I think, from
that's
somebody that's on their period is would be a disability. I mean, I don't want to open that can of worms, but that's one of the problems, is that you might find targeting people on disabilities, or sorry, let me rephrase that. You might find AI targeting on vulnerabilities that aren't covered by the prohibition under 5.1b, which might be far more problematic than something that is targeted on the basis of age, disability, or socioeconomic status.
It's very interesting to hear you speaking about this, because I feel like there are some problems that, the AI Act is a very long act, and I feel like not everyone has actually sat down to actually look at the provisions and think, oh, what does this mean?
Well, let me give you an example, right? If I design my AI system to target based upon age or vulnerability on age, then I'm going to fall foul of Article 5.1b. But if I target based upon gender or sex, then I'm not. And I find that uncomfortable.
And as you said, you have to basically design it too, because in order to get a subliminal technique, which I also find funny.
Target women aged, without saying age 15 to 30, but the effect of it is that, yes, this group or this demographic is likely to be suffering from PMS, during these dates of the month, but that's okay. So this is this is a very simple reading of 5.1b. Yeah, I think these are the kind of things that we're likely to encounter, and we might have to look to other areas of law that Article 5.1b are not necessarily prohibiting. If that makes the sense. If that makes the
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. As we know, when we actually met you in April, we
yeah.
had a presentation where you actually opened a very interesting window into the Unfair Commercial Practice Directive and consumer law, basically,
Mhm.
which in this case potentially could apply because I am a consumer, even if I'm a woman, and potentially,
Potentially, potentially could be a
potentially.
consumer and a woman at the same time. That's a novel idea, Rosie, that nobody's
I'm
ever thought of yet.
pretty sure my shoe buying app is pretty convinced that I am a consumer indeed, and
I
a
think
very
the
dear one.
entire economy is designed around presuming that you as a woman are also a consumer. That's why you get all
I
the
actually
advertising.
support the economy with my buying patterns, so
Yeah.
they better know. No, but talking about the consumer law, last time we met you, you actually did say something about consumer law, which I'm sure that many of our listeners will remember. And can I ask you, do you think that consumer law has made some progress in protecting consumers in this case from dark patterns, or do you think something else is needed?
Well, look, when I started off, dark patterns was certainly a data protection problem, or it was being looked at through the lens of data protection. Myself, a couple of other people opened the door for unfair commercial practices to look at dark patterns because there's a lot of dark patterns, like sneaking something into the basket is a consumer law problem that doesn't really touch on data protection. And I made the argument at the time that consumer law is very well suited to regulate dark patterns. Now, through no fault of the GDPR, the data protection regime, that's because it's just simply been around longer. Like there's more case law to argue, to make the determination about what's unfair or what's aggressive or what's misleading. There's also a body of work about pre-contractual environments, post-contractual environments. At the time, there was people still trying to figure out what data protection fairness meant in the context of the GDPR, where there's decades of jurisprudential thinking and academic work on what unfairness means in the consumer protection sphere. So obviously, both regimes working together can give consumers a lot. I also think there's a far more effective enforcement regime taking place in the consumer world than there is in the data protection world. That's through no fault of the data protection world, in that it's still relatively novel and maybe underfunded by government, and also because it's so broad that there has to be political decisions made about whose enforcement going to be against. So let's go after the big fish. Let's try and go out. And then there's long legal battles as a result of going after Meta or going after TikTok or going after, but that's just part and parcel of a kind of newish regime that's trying to find its feet regulating big tech with all the legal challenges that comes along with it. So I do think the consumer protection regime has been far more quietly proactive in regulating dark patterns, and also enforcing has been a little bit more forthcoming from the consumer protection regime than maybe the data protection regime. I do think that that will change over time. But the Amazon Prime, for example, and how easy it is to subscribe and how difficult it is to unsubscribe, that's a consumer protection problem, but you can take those lessons and apply them to data protection. You don't need to go through the data protection process. Hey, you got me to agree to processing. It should be as easy to deconsent or withdraw consent than it was to give you. That's the lesson that's come from an action that's been taken via consumer protection.
About consumer law and dark patterns, we want to open like one last big chapter of discussion, which is of course, the Digital Fairness Act.
Sure.
Also, from a policy perspective, like there have been a lot of talks about is it really necessary, or like are we adding like another law to the many laws that the EU has? Are we killing the competitiveness? And also, this is more like of a maybe personal request, because I was actually reading on LinkedIn the other day like a letter from some video game representatives from
Yeah,
Europe,
I
like
saw that.
to the European Commission, like
Mhm.
uh, let's say a little bit complaining about this new law that is coming up. So, like, could you maybe give us an example how like this will have implications for them, like in real life?
Well, yeah, so the gaming industry is a really interesting kind of part of the digital technology sphere. And I remember the letter that you're familiar that you were referring to there. So there's two ways to go about it, and this brings a lot of stuff together. There's no clarity yet. There's no decision, as far as I'm aware, about what the DFA is going to look like. Now, there's two lines of thinking. The first is that there's going to be a kind of omnibus. Let's do some patchworks over where all the hole is. And then there's a whole slew of people that are saying, well, no, we need a GDPR massive rethink so that we can have like a massive maximum harmonization approach to digital fairness. And if I was a betting man, which I'm not, I would say that politically, the world has kind of, the EU at least, has gone towards less regulation. So you're starting to see some, like the simplification process of the GDPR and the debates there. That there might not be the political will to have a big, huge GDPR type rethink of digital fairness. At the same time, my book is called Dark Patterns, Deceptive Design in the Law. When you go to the European Commission's consultation page to submit your answers to their call for a public consultation, the questions that they ask there are all framed around dark patterns. Or, you know, the questions there relating to my field are all about dark patterns. Now, deceptive design to me is significantly more broader than dark patterns. Dark patterns are limited to the user interface. This is a fundamental argument of my book. And the fact that they put those questions up on the website already concern me in the sense that they are thinking about user interface dark patterns and limited their thinking to what is kind of visible and policeable by some sort of enforcement or regulatory agency. Now, what I've argued in my book and elsewhere is that this is backwards thinking. This is thinking about what is deceptive 10 years ago, right? The tactics that Harry Brignall came up with this term back in 2010, right? 15 years later, we're not talking about dark patterns anymore. We're talking about deceptive design, except the European Commission has set out its stable as to let's talk about dark patterns and going forward. And the Digital Fairness Act should address the problem of dark patterns. I have argued that this is wrong, this is backwards thinking, and it doesn't move the conversation forward into fairness from the point of view of deceptive design. Now, let me give you a metaphor to explain what I'm talking about here. If I go into a house and I don't like the color of the paint or I don't like the wallpaper, I could issue an order to change the color of the paint or the wallpaper, and everybody goes home happy, right? If the problem is in the foundations of the house, if the wood is rotten or it hasn't been treated properly, or the cement that's been poured in the foundations is weak and uses the wrong type of sand or whatever, eventually the foundations of the house are going to come down on the person living in it, regardless of what color the wallpaper is or the paint on the house is. So unfortunately, it looks like the European Commission is viewing the user experience through the lens of the user interface and refusing to think more broadly about what's in the foundations, right? Whether the wood and the concrete are safe and secure for all users. And why is this problematic? It's because not everything is run by an AI system. An algorithmic system can be systemically and systematically designed to manipulate consumers. So what regulates that? If it's not the AI Act, where is the Algorithm Act? So then you have to go back to the UCPD, you have to go back to the GDPR if it's a data protection issue, or you have to hope that the system falls under the scope of the AI Act, which not all systems will fall under it. So in chapter 5, I kind of explain the difference between deterministic systems, which recommendation systems would fall under, and non-deterministic systems work. And I argue that systemic manipulation is something that we should be targeting through the lens of the Digital Fairness Act. Now, in response to the consultation, I'm going to be putting up my own answers to this very shortly, and I will be advocating in response to the work that I've already done on the space for specific prohibitions on systematic manipulation or systemic manipulation as a necessity, regardless of whether the DFA takes the form of an omnibus or it's a wholesale rethink of consumer law for the digital age. There should be some sort of protection for systemic manipulation built into whatever form the Digital Fairness Act takes. And that would cover, I think, a lot of the issues that I see taking place in the gaming industry, the use of gambling mechanics. It also covers addictive design. It also covers agentic AI. So if we can zoom out a little bit and say, these things are all problematic, and then here's what would regulate all of them, then systemic manipulation is the way to go, or systemic deceptive architectures would be the thing that needs to be regulated.
I This is a very interesting approach, and I feel like, there are so many people that say like, then what's the difference between an algorithm manipulating you into a specific behavior and like, I don't know, the supermarket aisle having vegetable at the beginning rather than like at the end or something
Yeah.
along the lines. But
But
I think
the difference is, so the very easy way to explain this is if you go into the supermarket and the supermarket is designed to have the fruit and vegetable at the front of the queue, you see it, right? You know it's there. You recognize that the supermarket has been architected. Now, the difference is that when somebody reorganizes the environment based upon your personal preferences, you believe erroneously that you have autonomy. Right? You can walk past the vegetables to go buy the packet of crisps or the sweets. But when the system has been designed and the choice environment has been personalized and you are none the wiser, is that really autonomy if you're being pushed into a certain direction? That's to me the most obvious difference between nudging in the atomic world versus personalizing a choice environment based upon preferences that a company has that might work. I'll give you it's a great question, Rosie, and I'll give you a very simple environment or answer to this question. If I go onto a website right now and I want to agree to processing, somebody might make a dark pattern and give me a green button, which is huge, and they might hide no thank you down in colored gray and a little tiny thing down at the bottom. And that's an obvious dark pattern. That's a user interface dark pattern. Now, let's just say what's your favorite color, by the way?
you asked me this.
Yeah.
You
What
actually
is
did
it?
ask me this in April. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
always pink because
It's
my
always
name is
pink.
Rosie.
Okay. So let's say, for example, you go and it's pink and blue, and your yeses, your buttons are equal weighting and whatnot. And this is, again, a very simple example, but the reason why it's pink and blue, if a regulator comes in and looks at that, they're going to say, oh, the buttons are equal sized. They're two different colors, the opposite side of the color spectrum. No problem there. It doesn't look like a dark pattern, so we don't have any issues with it. But if the reason you got pink and blue and I got purple and gold is because my personal data or the machine learned that I am more amicable or more likely to choose purple if given that as a choice, then that's a system architecture dark pattern. That's something that's taking place beneath the surface. The user interface looks balanced to the untrained eye or to the trained eye, but what's actually happening is a manipulation is controlling the functions of the user interface from below. Now, is that necessarily an AI system that figures that out? Or is it an algorithmic system that designs that manipulation? And you could take this to a number of different examples in the gaming platforms. Is this, I'll slow the service down, I'll slow the gaming process down because I believe somebody's getting very frustrated at the speed of the game, so they're more likely to then pay for something that they wouldn't have done on a different day, or their friends are now online. So I've learned that their social circle are now playing, so I'll make it harder for them to advance. So they're more likely to pay so they can keep up with their friends. That's not a user interface dark pattern. That's not something that we regulate via Article 25. That's something different that we have to address. And that's one of the points that I make in the book.
I feel like this distinction that you made just here and just right now is particularly important because I feel like many people don't understand that when you say that the interface is personalized, it doesn't mean that the content is what kind of reflects your persona. It means that the manipulation is made in a way so that the content that is presented to you is more kind of can appeal to your taste much better than in any other case.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I feel like
I mean, and to me, it's not that big of a stretch to go, okay, if I go onto an airline and I'm using a Mac and a computer and the flight company says, okay, well, we presume you've got a little bit more discretionary income, so we'll give you maybe a 15% surplus as to what somebody that comes on, no offense, but like a Dell user or like a Google Chromebook or something like that. There's price differentiation based upon some external factor that the machine has learned about you. It's not a stretch to say, well, when you go into Amazon and you do a search for tennis balls, that the results I get are going to be different than the results you get. Yeah. But,
and that's not just because I'm a woman, let's say
that's not
so.
just because you're a woman. But so the choice environment has been personalized, right? And then when you start taking this and extending it out to the broader forms of digital technology outside of things like, buying an airline ticket, and you think about the content we see on a social media platform, for example, then then it's a different type of manipulation. If I give my AI system the task of maximize user engagement, right? And the AI system learns for what will work to engage Mark is to present choices in this way as opposed to choices in that way. The AI system is going to organize my environment very differently than if it wasn't an AI system, if it was just a basic algorithmic recommendation system. And when you add things in like large action models, which will respond to patterns of behavior that the system has learned and are using, then you have a very different internet than the one we had 2 years ago.
Oh, that's the best guess I could. Great. You just prepared my next question, so that's going to be the last question. Great, well done. What are you talking about when you say large action models? How could you know I wanted to ask you about that?
Well, it's in the end of chapter 8, and I'd written so the background to this is that I've obviously been working on dark patterns for a while. When I sit down to write the book, the stuff's kind of flowing out because I've been working in that space for a number of years. When I got to chapter 8, just before I started writing chapter 8, I had the experience to work with a large action model that was not available to the public, but I'd been asked to sort of make some comments on it. And the large action model was used by a major, or was going to be deployed by a major advertising and marketing sales company. And they wanted to get my impressions of what it could and couldn't do, maybe to give them a warning of what they might anticipate. So I wrote up a little article, which is up on SSRM, which is a primer into what large action models are. If you think about large language models, you look for patterns of behavior and training data in words so that they can predict, what the likely answer is based upon how the models are trained. Large action models aren't using text or books or articles or whatever as the basis for them for their training data. What they're doing is how we actually behave with the actions that we use online. So what do our mouse look like, and what does it look like when we go to shut the window down, and how do we then rearrange or change the environment in response to what users' actions predict our behavior is going to be. So if we don't just go shut the window down, we maybe play around with the mouse for a little bit, but there's a pattern of the way we do that when we go to shut a window down. So if I create an environment for, say, for example, an e-commerce website in which a large action model is deployed, I would look for patterns of actions from the user. And then when it looks like they're going to leave or they're disengaging, I could maybe give them a sale or a promo bubble or some sort of disincentive from shutting the window down. Or maybe in a game, I could make it easier for them to get to the next level so that they stay. And this is the next evolution of what. And anyway, when I got to the end of chapter 8, obviously you're under contract for a certain number of words, give or take, 200 or 300. And I just knew that I had more to write about this and where it was going. And I've always been fascinated by thinking about data as pools of data and what happens when you make the pool bigger from different data that maybe isn't necessarily well thought of. And the example I always give is like if Google Drive and Google Documents and Microsoft 365, if they measure your typing speed over years, if not decades, then they have a pretty big pool of users that and their typing speeds that is worthless on their own. But if an AI system gets a hold of that data and then maybe people's medical records and you put them together, then maybe the AI system learns, the people that decrease their typing speed over time, which wouldn't be noticeable to the user, wouldn't be noticeable to a doctor, they develop dementia or they develop Alzheimer's. Then Microsoft has got a pretty powerful diagnostic tool that gives some insight into a group of people that demonstrably have a pattern of decreasing typing speed, which might reveal at some point in the future they're going to have dementia or Alzheimer's. Now, that's just 2 data sets. So let's imagine millions of data pools that are all coming together, that AI systems are learning about patterns that were not obvious to you or I, but were obvious to an AI system looking for something that was novel and unique. So I started also seeing this propensity of some of the big tech companies selling consumer technology and neuro devices. So AR, VR, these kind of bracelets that people were wearing on their head and eye masks. And Meta just came out with a bracelet. And I was like, what's the, my first is, okay, will I get one of those? No.
Of course, it's
Yeah.
fashionable.
Yeah,
Come on.
fashionable, but also what's the real purpose of this? Like, it's to obtain a new type of data, right? The real purpose of this is not to make money in the consumer gadget. These devices can probably be loss leaders, I'm speculating. But what the real purpose is to gain a new form of data. And what happens when that data pool is mixed with the data that we know some of these companies already have, whether it's biometric or whether it's typing speed or whether it's your browsing history or your location data, whatever it may be, what does that data set give us? So what I'm working on now is AI that has been trained on neurodata and the risk and the implications for society in a number of fields, from law enforcement, state security, and consumer protection.
Well, I guess you will not be buying Meta glasses as well.
I'm not sure there's a whole lot of neurodata coming out of my brain these days that will help inform Meta's AI solutions, but I might try them on just for a good Facebook profile picture or something like that at some point. But what
Yeah,
I'm
because
really
only
doing is
boomers have
walking
Facebook
around with
profile
those,
pictures right now.
yeah, those EEG skull caps with all the electrodes coming out. I think that's probably more appropriate for somebody like me. So.
Yeah, I feel like in the digital age, the best way to make it through is be stupid. It's gonna be like the end of the
Yeah.
next book.
Well, yeah, maybe what I do is I'll put it on on my dog or a hamster or something like that to really confuse Meta and dirty their data pool, so to speak, of neurodata.
This has to become a movement.
Yeah,
Get your hamster done.
getting hamster done. Yeah,
Save humanity.
yeah,
Get a hamster.
and a
Great.
hamster. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love this so much. I would like keep on talking forever, but of course we have to let you go. And we have to remind everyone about your great book that is now finally available for being purchased
Yeah.
and actually arrive on time.
Yes.
Jaco, would you want to give us the title?
Yeah, let me take it because I don't remember now.
We will put a picture in our show notes, right?
Yeah,
Mm,
the book, which is called Dark Patterns, Deceptive Designs, and the Law. Right, Mark?
perfect.
And my new book, I don't know if you can see it. That's the book. That's the proposed book cover
Oh,
there.
because you're blurred. Blur it out.
Yeah.
Artificial intelligence, neurodata, and society. Law at the edge of cognition.
Oh,
Oof.
will I get the book before I turn 30? That is the question.
The book is actually, yeah, so I'm delivering the final manuscript before the end of the year, and I would imagine it would be out next summer.
Oh, okay, summer reads. Well, everyone, listen up. Aside from solving the issues of humanity today with us, Mark Leiser also has a great way to have us spend a lovely summer, which is reading a book about cognitive manipulation.
Yes.
Yay!
Okay. And justification for a third appearance on your wonderful podcast next summer to promote that book.
He is the best guest ever. Well,
Thank you very much, Lizzie.
thank you so much for coming here on the show. I will see you very soon, I'm told.
Yes. Yes. Okay. And nice to meet you too, number 3.
It
He's number 3,
was
but
really
he's
nice.
essential.
Yeah.
Thank
The
you.
essential number 3.
Well, thank you all. This was all for Legal for Tech, the podcast.